Hi, we're backstage again at Desktop Virtualization Hour, and we're talking with Dai Vu, who is Director of Partner Solutions Marketing at Microsoft. Dai, welcome.
Thank you for having me here.
So Dai, I'm sure a lot of people watching today have the impression that Microsoft's desktop virtualization strategy has been really geared more to a rich client approach. What can you tell us to start to shift that perception?
Yeah, absolutely. Microsoft is very committed to VDI. It's a key component of our desktop virtualization portfolio. I think perhaps a lot of the confusion in the marketplace is that customers tend to equate desktop virtualization to VDI, whereas in reality it's much broader than that. If you kind of break down the traditional desktop stack, taking a look at hardware, operating systems, application, user data, and settings, desktop virtualization is really removing the tight linkages between those different layers, right? It really creates this dynamic, more flexible environment. And at the end of the day, VDI is just one form of desktop virtualization. It's just one way of creating that layer of abstraction between the operating system and the hardware. So when customers look at desktop virt, they kind of look at broadly across their composition of their user base, right? So they'll have a diversity of users. You'll have some knowledge workers, you'll have some task workers, you'll have some mobile workers, and they'll think about, what are the business challenges, what are the management challenges they're trying to solve? And what they'll find out is VDI is probably a great solution for some use case scenarios, and for others, it's probably not. And so I think every customer, and we encourage this, every customer should evaluate VDI. We just don't think VDI is a solution for every desktop.
So who ought to be looking at VDI solutions in Microsoft's view?
Well, what we've seen in terms of early deployments, where customers have been traditionally successful in a couple areas, right? One is if they're managing a large number of unmanaged PCs, maybe a large number of contractors, offshore workers, or bring your own PC devices. We've also seen success with highly regulated industries such as healthcare or financial services, where if you move a lot of those desktops into the data center, it may help with security and regulatory compliance. Maybe if you have a large number of distributed desktops across your remote branch office locations and you have very strong network connectivity, that may be a solution as well. And then we also see traditional task workers who have very limited set of applications, but maybe they might need some more level of personalization for their desktops. Some of the benefits that we've heard from some of these customers in those use case scenarios include things like, as I mentioned, security and compliance, right? Since everything is in the data center, applications, data, and desktops, it gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of delivering a secure desktop to a variety of connected devices. The other benefits is around business continuity. Right, which is that you're able to leverage a lot of your existing data center processes and tools to do desktop backup and recovery. And then the other benefits are mostly around being able to provision desktops more quickly since you're owning all of those resources in the data center. So in summary, we're highly committed to VDI. We've made investments in this area. As we released Windows Server 2008 R2, we introduced Remote Desktop Services, which is an integrated broker that can connect users to both sessions and VDI. And then with today's announcements with Remote FX and Dynamic Memory, it's clear that we're making additional investments to enable this scenario, but all in the context of a broader desktop virtualization strategy.
Dai, you mentioned remote desktop services, an interesting question around that. And I think, again, a source of confusion for some people. With RDS in Windows Server 2008 R2, why does the customer need Citrix? I mean, why can't you just stay with the Microsoft solution? Where does Citrix fit into the whole picture here?
Absolutely. So I think as a general guidance to customers is that for lower complexity, lower scale deployments, the in-box connection broker with RDS is probably sufficient. For higher complexity, higher scale deployments, we would expect customers to pull in partners such as Citrix and their solution Zen Desktop. But there are a number of factors, right? One of them might be whether you're running desktops in multiple locations versus a single location, whether those desktops are running across a local area network or a combination of local area and wide area networks, and whether your provisioning strategies, whether it's more of a static desktop deployment or more of a dynamic desktop deployment. And those are just a number of factors that customers need to consider in terms of those deployment options. Now, this notion of having an in-box platform capability and having partners such as Citrix build on top of that is really no different than what we've been doing for 15 years with terminal services, now remote desktop services, and Citrix Zen App. So we've been touching, over the span of those 15 years, tens and hundreds of millions of desktops and delivering a server-based computing experience. And in some ways, you can think of VDI as taking that collaboration one step further. Session virtualization and VDI in some ways are very similar and also in some ways very different. The way they're different is that in session virtualization, you have multiple users executing applications in a shared environment, whereas in VDI, you have those users having their own individual desktops. So where session virtualization has greater utilization of resources because you have more density of users per server, VDI gives you greater control and personalization of the desktop. So it's perfectly fine that we pull in partners because we have a very rich ecosystem to add and build out this VDI solution, not just with Citrix, but partners that span desktop, thin client, server, storage, remote software capability, including HP, Dell, Quest, Wise, NetApp, and all of these bring this together into a very comprehensive and compelling solution.
So Dai, when we're talking about VDI, we're essentially talking about data center virtualization, and it's hard not to notice that VMware has had quite a head start in this area. Microsoft is widely perceived as a late to market. Why wouldn't people looking to do VDI just stay with VMware? And why should they go to Microsoft?
Sure. So absolutely, VMware is a very formidable competitor, and I think, but what we're seeing in the marketplace is, especially with the release of Windows Server 2008 R2 last year, that there's tremendous momentum for Hyper-V. We introduced some new features at that time, which in some ways brought us to parity with VMware, features such as live migration, but also in other areas around performance and scalability positions us very favorably. The other key dynamic we're seeing is that customers are really actively pursuing mixed virtual server environment. So even though they may have invested VMware in the data center, they are deploying Hyper-V side by side by those same servers. And I think a lot of it is driven by the fact that a lot of customers, several years ago, started signing these multi-year enterprise license agreements with VMware. And now they're hesitant when they're up for renewal to make these long-term commitments. And this is really a perfect opportunity for them to introduce Hyper-V into their environment, because Hyper-V is a feature of Windows Server 2008. So it's a capability they already have. It's just a matter of activating it. And so they're doing this with new server deployments. They're doing this with new workloads and maybe even just new projects such as VDI. And so for customers who are looking at VDI, again for the subset of desktops that are applicable for VDI, they absolutely should be looking at Microsoft and especially our joint solution with Citrix, because you're looking at two companies who have a very rich history of delivering a remote desktop experience. And the key features and value proposition that we bring are things such as being able to deliver a very rich remote user experience, right? We support a very rich, high-fidelity desktop, supporting audio, video, high-performance graphics. And you saw with the announcement today with Remote FX, both of these companies are very committed to creating this full-fidelity desktop experience. The second piece is being able to bring a very comprehensive portfolio to the table. We have a very comprehensive, not only data center to desktop, but in the desktop virtualization space, we have capabilities in application virtualization, presentation virtualization, local hosted technologies, as well as server hosted technologies. And this is important because things such as application virtualization are things that you want to deploy regardless whether you deploy a local desktop model or a hosted desktop model. And lastly, it's all about management. I mean, really management is the key to sort of deploying a virtual desktop infrastructure, because you have so many moving parts between the desktop and server infrastructure. And unfortunately, a lot of existing VDI solutions in the market require you to introduce new management technologies that doesn't necessarily leverage the management infrastructure you have in place. So System Center, for example, is a very integrated management solution that manages both your desktop and your server, physical and virtual environments, and being able to get faster time to value and leverage a lot of the skills and processes you have in place really gets customers in a very well-managed infrastructure.
There's been some confusion about Microsoft's licensing of VDI. Wondering if you could help enlighten us about that.
Yeah, sure. One of the challenges of VDI is that there's so many different moving parts between server components, desktop components, and management. And Microsoft has made a number of steps to simplify the licensing. So last fall, we introduced the VDI suite, both in the standard edition and the premium edition. And really what it does is it brings together all the core components you need for infrastructure and management into a single orderable SKU for a single price subscription per access device. And the difference between the standard suite and the premium suite is that the standard suite is geared more to VDI type deployments, whereas the premium suite gives you rights for both VDI as well as sessions. And additionally, for thin clients, we have licensing called Virtual Desktop Access, VDA, that enables them or gives them rights to execute the desktop remotely in the server, enables them to move their desktops across physical servers and dynamically create them. For rich clients that are covered under SA, no additional licensing is required, so they actually have rights to that already. So this is actually a big change from what we had before, as was announced in the main session. So just a great example of Microsoft continuing to listen to their customers and really enabling a scenario that customers are asking for.
So we're going to have to stop here, but Dai, a quick summary.
Absolutely. So I think the key takeaway is that VDI is just one form of desktop virtualization. And for customers who are looking at VDI, the Microsoft, and especially the Microsoft with Citrix solution, is a very compelling offer. We have a very comprehensive portfolio of desktop virtualization. We have a very integrated management solution. And then we've taken many steps to simplify licensing to help customers deploy faster.
Dai Vu, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Great talking to you.